So today we want to have a conversation with you about systems thinking, and there's two things I want to say to get us started in that conversation. One is that every organization in the context that we live in today need leaders who can lead change. And the second thing that I want to say as we begin this conversation is to say that if you're going to lead change effectively, a part of what is a required skill is learning to take notice of how you think. In other words, to think about how you think. That's something that only human beings can do. And today we want to talk about two different ways of thinking. And what we hope is that you'll actually learn to notice when you're thinking one way and when you're thinking in the other.
Yeah, we think this is really crucial for not just leaders, but anyone who is working on change in an organization.
Right.
Because it comes out of the assumption that if we have simple challenges, simple solutions will work.
Right.
But if we have complex challenges, and that's what most of us are up against, those are going to require complex solutions, and that's where we think systems thinking comes in. And so here are the two different kinds of thinking.
One of them we would call linear thinking or cause and effect thinking. Cause and effect thinking is there's a problem in the organization, and as a leader or as a participant in that, what I do is I kind of scan the horizon. I ask, where's the problem? What needs to be fixed? Where's the breakdown? And then I go work on that. And even if I'm doing complex cause and effect thinking, I might say A causes B that causes C, but I'm still doing cause and effect thinking. And in simple problems, cause and effect thinking is really simple. Last night I went into the bathroom and the chain that connects to the handle that flushes the toilet had come unhooked. I didn't need to do complex thinking to be able to do that. I just need to take the top off, reach in there, get the chain, and hook it back on the handle.
Right.
And that was effective.
Yeah. So cause and effect or linear thinking
is not bad.
Sometimes it's exactly what we need.
Right. Exactly.
And when we have more complex problems in front of us, systems thinking is typically the way to go.
Exactly.
So just to be real clear about what linear thinking is, it's that cause and effect, that A causes B, which causes C, or even A and B and C all cause D.
Right.
But it's still linear, and it sees the problem like a machine, right? So it wants to break the problem down into its parts and then find the smallest parts and fix them.
So in my car, when the water pump goes out, I take that part out and I put a new one in, and everything works. But in human systems, one of the principles is that everything impacts everything else, and so I change this, and this changes this, and then that ripples over to here. And so you can't think about change in living organizations like you think about a machine.
Yeah, I think more in terms of like the human body, right? If you've ever had surgery, you know how, just taking care of the problem just creates all kinds of other problems in recovery. And so that kind of linear thinking also assumes typically that the problem is out there somewhere, that if we can just figure out who is doing it wrong or who is the problem or what is the problem, then we can just go fix that thing, and then we won't have a problem anymore. And sometimes, like with your toilet, that's the appropriate method of problem solving. But sometimes the problem is not out there, it's in here. And
the final thing, and maybe one of the most important things to hear about cause and effect thinking, is that the role of the leader is to fix the problem.
That's what we pay them for,
that's
right?
That's what we pay them for. And if they're not fixing the problem, then they're not doing their job. And again, when the problems are simple, then leaders can do that. But in complex problems, we're going to talk about thinking about leadership in a different kind of way. And so let's move then from the cause and effect thinking to what is linear? I mean, what does systems thinking look like?
Yeah, so I think the starting place is just that systems are extremely complex.
Right.
Sometimes we try to use diagrams to show what, and you can't do it. You can't represent the complexity of a system in a 2D diagram.
Yeah, we have this exercise that we'll do with an organization where we'll say, tell us about a problem you have. And they'll tell us, and we'll get it on the board. And then we'll say, let's talk and think about 5 possible things that are under that. And so we'll generate 4 or 5 different ideas, and we'll say, now of all of these 5, which is the one that you could agree together is the most likely contributing factor to that big problem. And they'll choose that one and they'll say, now, let's think, what are 5 things that cause this? And we'll do that 4 or 5 times, and all of a sudden you've got this problem up here, and you've got 25 different potential contributors to the problem. And it's like, where do you start? What do you do? It's so complex that it's really hard to know.
And all those things, if we broke each one of them down further, they would become increasingly complex.
Exactly.
And that's why just kind of a simple problem can feel completely intractable.
Exactly.
Because when we really get down into it, it's very complex. And what we as human beings want to do when we get into real complexity, this is important, what our brains will try to make us do is say, that's too hard, that's too complicated. Let's simplify this and go back to linear thinking, because that's what we know how to do. And it is challenging to force ourselves to stay in the complexity of the problem and not look for a quick fix.
Yeah, I almost believe that until an organization chooses systems thinking as a part of their culture, then the forces at work in the organization to push you back to that cause and effect thinking are so powerful that you can never get to the kind of systems thinking that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And so as if that wasn't complicated enough, the second thing about systems is that systems are deeply and intrinsically connected. Right. So you said a minute ago something about how every change changes everything.
Yeah.
That's that deep level of connection.
Right. And so we make a change that impacts this person over here, and then this person goes and talks to that person over there, and then that person has this experience, and all of a sudden, within just a short period of time, multiple people have been have had an experience of being impacted by a simple decision that was being made. And it's critical for leaders to see that. You know, what you can do is say, we're going to make a decision, and they ought not to go talk to each other, or they ought not to be sharing that information.
Right.
But you've got to accept, and when you're doing systems thinking, you've got to accept that that's a part of the design, that people are designed in a way that our connections to one another, that when something happens that impacts me, I am just naturally going to be able to talk about that, and then that my talking about that is going to impact other people in the system. And so everything is connected.
And what's so crazy about that is that even if I don't talk about that,
right,
the neurons in your brain are going to pick up on the nonverbals.
What's wrong with Tricia? She's been quiet all day today.
And you may not even know that your brain has picked up on that. The connections are really deep. And then, of course, in our culture today, between social media and technology, those connections are more rapid and more widespread than ever.
Right.
The third big piece about thinking in terms of systems is the systems are constantly changing. And so the only thing that doesn't change is change. Right. Systems are constantly changing. And I think, again, in our culture today, the rate of change is something that we've never seen before in human history. I remember
back as early as the 1989, 90, 91, where we began to read about
back in the olden days.
In the old days, where we began to read about that what is different in today's world than change has always been present. But the pace of change has been slow enough that you could do all of the other stuff that had to be done to deal with the complexity and the connectedness. But the pace of change today has created a whole different set of issues and challenges that leaders have to face that makes the connectedness and the complexity even more connected and more complex.
And every sector is having to deal with that. From families to businesses to congregations to nonprofits, government, education, law enforcement. We are all, I remember that book that I actually read and don't remember a lot of it, but the title always stuck with me, Surfing the Edge of Chaos. Because that's where we are. And again, our brains say, that's too much. Let's just go back and do what we can handle.
So listen to what she just said. If you can begin to notice when that happens to you, when you can notice the impulse to move back to cause and effect thinking, and then have some kind of agreement among yourselves, or some, watchword, or some mantra, something that says, no, we're going to stay in this a little longer. Now, what we're not going to do in this video is give you a massive overview of systems thinking. But what we can do is give you 2 or 3 things that are central to systems thinking, that if you could just master these practices, it will take you way down the road. And the first of those practices is the recognition that everyone in a system contributes to the results the system is getting. So remember, go back to the cause and effect. There's some problem. What we're looking at doing is we're saying, what's the problem? Who's the problem? Where do we fix this? In systems thinking, what you affirm is that even in a two-person system, that whatever results you're getting, everybody is contributing to that problem. And when you get 4 or 5 people, that becomes increasingly complex. You get 10 or 15 people, and it is just so complex that it's almost hard to get your hands around. But a fundamental shift in your thinking and in your behavior is that when we're together as a team, you're working on your organization, you're trying to reach your goals and do your work, and there's a breakdown, you're not getting where you want to go, the question that you have to learn to ask, and maybe especially if you're the leader, but everybody has to learn to ask this question is, what am I doing? Or, what am I not doing? What am I saying? Or, what am I not saying that is contributing to the results that we're getting?
And see, I hate that, right? When I leave work and I go home and I want to complain to Craig,
right.
I almost never go in and say, things are not working at work and I'm contributing to the results we're getting. I want to go talk about how everybody else is messing this up for us. But this is absolutely crucial. I'm part of the system and therefore I'm contributing to the results.
And so we're not saying that others aren't also contributing to the results.
Right.
Why are we saying focus on ourselves?
Because we're part of the system.
We're part of the system. Yeah. And the thing that I've come to recognize is I don't have much success changing other people. But with a little effort and some intentionality, as I can begin to see the contribution that I'm making, I can actually have some pretty significant impact on myself, on changing my own behavior. What I do, what I don't do, what I say, what I don't say. So that's the first kind of really important, and we want you to hear as a principle, but we also want you to hear as a practice. Yeah. It's a practice that you can take on and master over time.
So we keep using this word change, and yet something that is true is that systems resist change, even the changes that we all think we want.
Right.
The nature of a system is to seek stability, to seek balance, homeostasis, and to resist that change.
Right.
And that's not because we're bad.
And that's such a critical deal. When you find people resisting, I used to, in the early years of my young adult leadership, I was leading a large organization that we were doing some massive change. And anybody who didn't want to go where I wanted to go, who resisted or who had questions or they had doubts, like I demonized them. These are bad people. What's wrong with them? They don't want to move to the future. And over time, what I've come to recognize, and it really helps to not only recognize this, but to remind yourself of this. The systems resist change. And so, this is just a part of the process. And when I can say, oh, this is homeostasis at work, rather than blaming someone or some group of people in the organization, it gives me access to real change in ways that kind of blaming and shaming never gets done.
Yeah. And what's funny about that is that if you get rid of that person that we've labeled as resistant, somebody else will just fill that role.
Yeah.
And you see that happen a few times and it starts to make sense.
Yeah. And so you want to work on seeing what I'm contributing to the change. When you feel resistance, you want to name that as homeostasis rather than blaming and shaming someone. And then I think the third kind of basic principle is that systems will change. Even though they resist change, they will change when we can begin to find the leverage. And so one of the pieces of leverage is like, particularly if the leader, or the closer you are to the center of the leadership, the more how you're showing up. That's the language we'll use for what you do or don't do, what you say or don't say, how you're showing up. And especially when people resist change, when the organization resists change, how do you show up? If you can change that, if you can change how you're showing up, that's going to be a place of leverage. I think the other thing about systems thinking is that thing we were talking about a while ago. So we've got this thing going on, and there are 25 contributing factors, and I might sit in a room by myself and say, well, this is where we need to intervene. But you get 5 people in the room who work in different parts of the organization and see it differently. There's a discernment process, or there's a reflective process that gives you access to the collective wisdom of the group. And often when you'll parallel the individuals changing how they show up, and then you've done this reflective work to get to where is the real leverage, that's where you get real change in an organization that's resisting change because homeostasis is real. And so We think systems thinking is really critical. It's a set of skills that can be mastered and practiced over time. We've been working on this for more than a decade in our own lives and in the organizations we lead. And we want to challenge you to take on distinguishing cause and effect thinking from systems thinking and from mastering the practices of systems thinking that we've described here.